Hello everyone. I'm Daniel Stubbs, one of the Calcul Quebec analysts at the Université de Montreal, and I'll be doing the presentation today for the data migration to Béluga workshop or tutorial. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat in the YouTube thing, and one of my colleagues here will pass the questions along to me if they seem to be need to be answered right now. Otherwise, we'll deal with the questions at the end of the slides. Okay, so we'll move on here to the next slide. So this is just the financial partners of Calcul Quebec. Right? You've probably seen this before. And a little outline or resume of today's talk. So we'll be discussing a little bit about the new user support model that applies to Béluga, the software stack that will be available on Béluga, and finally the main topic of today's presentation, which will be migrating your data from one of the older regional clusters like Guillemin or Breery to Béluga. Okay, so the new user support model. So the staff here in Quebec are now essentially working together as a single united team to support the new national clusters, as they're called, such as Béluga, but also Graham and Cedar and Niagara. So the older systems, these legacy systems, were operated by the local staff at the particular site. So, for instance, Guillemin was operated by the staff there at McGill, Breery by the staff here at the UDM, Mammut by the staff at the University of Sherbrooke. And when you asked a question, it was answered by someone local to that cluster. But in the new model that's going to be used with Béluga, your questions could be answered really by anyone from Quebec. Right? So Quebec-based researchers will receive support from Quebec staff, but that could be staff at Quebec City, Montreal, Sherbrooke, wherever. So your questions will be answered by a Calcul Quebec employee, but not necessarily someone from that particular site. Right? But the site should be able to be supported equally well by staff, even if they're not local. The software stack. So on Béluga, the software stack will be essentially the same as the one you've already seen on Graham and Cedar. It's available on a lot of the older clusters using the commands that are shown in the slide there. All right, and we recommend that you start testing your codes right now, which you can do obviously by either sourcing the appropriate file or alternatively by going to one of the new clusters like Graham or Cedar to test your code, see what modules are available. Right. If there's a module that's missing, you can request its installation by writing to support@computcanada.ca. Right, and otherwise getting accustomed to the new environment on these national clusters. So now we come to the main point of today's presentation, which is the data migration to Béluga from the legacy clusters. So the latest news about Béluga, so the cluster is physically installed at ETS. It's been cabled up and installed and is currently just undergoing some beta testing and a few last-minute acceptance tests. Its configuration is very similar to the one on Cedar and Graham. So it's the same software stack, this CC-CVMFS stack, the same scheduler, Slurm. Okay, and until the cluster enters production, which we hope will be in a couple weeks, if all goes well, it's currently being tested by a group of beta testers who are running a variety of jobs to test the performance and stability, make sure that everything's configured correctly with the scheduler, things like this. Okay. However, the storage system, and which should be under backup, we hope, sometime this week, has been accessible to all Compute Canada users via Globus since March 5th. Okay, so it's uniquely available via Globus, right? Trying to use rsync or SCP or WinSCP will not work, but Globus should work, right? So you can begin to migrate your data already right now. In fact, starting a week ago. The legacy systems, essentially Brewery and Gilman in particular. So Gilman will be shut down sometime this spring. The exact day is not yet clear. For Brewery, it should be early in April, right, or the very end of March. So the archive data on tape will be transferred by the system administrators. However, the data on disk, which is to say the home, project, scratch, will need to be done by users, i.e. you, right? However, it's quite possibly the case that a significant amount of the data on Gilman and Brewery does not need to be transferred to Béluga because it's duplicate or it's data in Scratch that should have been deleted perhaps months ago. There's certainly no reason to copy it over to the new cluster Béluga. Concerning your current storage use, if the system you're concerned with is Brewery, the best idea is to write us an email. Send us an email to brewery@calcuquebec.ca asking about the storage use of your particular group, and we'll be happy to get you an answer back probably the very same day. For Gilman, there's a variety of commands that you can use to run and get the details of your current storage consumption immediately. So for the home directory and also your Scratch, you can run the command myquota. For the project space, you can run prquota-a, and that'll show the total space usage and the file count. And it also shows a per user space usage and file count. And of course, there is also available the classic Unix POSIX tools like df to get information about your disk usage as well. So clean up your data, right? Why? Because there are going to be quotas on Béluga, and as there are on the other national clusters, and these quotas will be essentially the same, and they will be enforced right from the very beginning. So for home, which is really intended just for source code, small parameter files, job submission scripts, things of this nature, it is going to be a quota of 50 gigabytes and no more than 500,000 files. The project space, which is shared, so this is for the entire research group, right? All the users sponsored by a given PI. The default is 1 terabyte of space and 500,000 files. However, the PI can send us an email requesting that this project space be increased from 1 terabyte to 10 terabytes. Finally, the Scratch, which is 20 terabytes and 1 million files. However, the files on Scratch, any files more than 60 days old, will be deleted. There's sort of an automated Scratch purging system in place. So it's certainly not for storing files, nor for that matter for sharing data, because the Scratch is by user. And also, there's no backup on Scratch, right? Unlike the home and project, where there should be a backup in place sometime this week. So as mentioned, on demand, a PI can request that the quota be increased in the project space from 1 terabyte to 10 terabytes. And note as well that the RAC 2019 storage allocations for the project spaces are already active on Béluga. So if you were awarded 35 terabytes of space on Béluga, that space will already be available, right? So that you'll be able to copy your data there starting right now. So delete any unnecessary files. Obviously, right, you can move the files over, you can then simply delete them. You can look for duplicates, look in particular for intermediate and temporary results from jobs that might have run weeks or even months ago, right? As when you're moving from one house to another, or similarly in this case, it's a good chance to do a big cleanup, right? And get rid of a lot of things that you don't need anymore, things that have been sitting around for months or years. If you have a lot of files, and this is certainly a case with certain users and certain research groups, you need to use a tool like tar or zip to archive them, right? Because as you saw, there are strict quotas on the number of files that are allowed on the new system. So you cannot simply dump millions of small files into the project space on Béluga. That's simply not going to work. Right? You need to learn how to tar them up and organize them. Eventually, even perhaps in some cases, use a database to store this data. Right? But if you have questions, once again, a good idea is to write to support@computecanada.ca, and one of the analysts can sit down and think about how best to organize your data. Preparing the data transfer. So next, compress very large files. You can use gzip or xz. All right. Assuming this is a group that is going to be transferring their data, sometimes it's sensible to have one person be responsible for transferring all the data. But in that case, obviously, this individual has to have read access to all the important files and folders that need to be moved in the project space. Finally, the Globus ID account. You can use your Compute Canada account, right? By simply going to globus.computecanada.ca. Right? You should be able to use your Compute Canada credentials to log in there, right? To use Globus to actually carry out the transfer once you've converted everything into these compressed tar files, for instance. Right? So for now, only the Globus service can be used to transfer data to Béluga. Okay. There are various possibilities. You can simply copy the individual files one by one. That's one possibility. You can also use a sync option to get it to transfer new and changed files. But you probably want to avoid this delete option because it can be a little aggressive, and you could wind up eventually deleting data that you didn't want to have deleted. So the new user and group IDs will be set automatically with Globus, right? And there's a link there, right, to go onto the Compute Canada wiki, which has an entire page dedicated to Globus, including various options about how to use Globus and so on and so forth. Okay. So if you do use Globus, what does it look like? This is an example of the interface, right? It's essentially a tab in your web browser, right? So you choose two endpoints. One of the endpoints presumably would be Breery, for instance, or Gilman. The other endpoint would be Béluga, right? And then you'd simply highlight a file or a directory on Breery, and then click on the appropriate arrow to tell Globus to transfer this directory or this star file from Breery or Gilman to Béluga, right? And in the case of Globus, it's an encrypted transfer, and you also should normally get a confirmation email when the transfer has been carried out, telling you the transfer has been carried out successfully. If you're worried about data integrity, you can certainly do an MD5 sum of the files, both before and after, to make sure that there's been no corruption or other problems with the data during the transfer via Globus. Once Béluga is available to the general public, which, as I mentioned, we hope will be in a couple of weeks, there will be obviously other options for transferring your data, like SCP or rsync when SCP. But for the moment, these tools are not going to be available to anyone other than the beta testers and CalcuQuebec staff. So as an ordinary user, you'll have to simply use Globus. One thing that's important when it comes to the project space is the fact that the Unix group is what determines the quota for files and other data in the project space. Okay, so it's really important that you make sure that the group identity for your data is correct. Because if the wrong group has been set, the files will be attributed to the wrong quota, and that can obviously lead to these quota exceeded messages when you try to transfer over data or create new files or whatever. So it's very important to use a command like ls-l to see what is the group of directories and files in your project space to make sure that, in fact, they are associated with the right group. If you're using the rsync command, let's say in two or 3 weeks hence. All right, you can use the options here that are mentioned. All right, to ensure that the files, when they're copied over, will have the right group membership. Because if they don't, obviously the rsync command can easily fail. And this is one of the most common messages we get from users complaining that I keep on getting this quote exceeded message. It's because your file copy is being carried out with the wrong group identity for the files in the project space. On Béluga, you'll be able to use the command disk usage report, which some of you may have already used in the past on Graham and Cedar, to check your storage space usage on Béluga. And the ch group command allows you to assign the correct group to your data if, in fact, certain data has been copied over and is associated with the wrong group. You can use the ch grp command to change it to the correct group. So in conclusion, the migration of data on disk, project space, for example, or Scratch, right, in the case of a brewery, is the user's responsibility. All right, the sysadmin staff here will take care of transferring tape, some stuff in archives, but the stuff on disk is the user's responsibility. And for now, this means using Globus. All right, we recommend that you keep a backup copy of your data during the first few weeks of your use of Béluga. You might want to get an external disk and keep it there. It would be an excellent idea as well. All right, so you have a backup copy if there's a problem, and which you can also use, obviously, for things like doing an MD5 sum and keeping things like that. Okay. So, last a few links here. The Compute Canada Wiki contains a lot of pages dedicated to things like transferring data, storage and file management, the layout of the project space on the new national clusters, how to share data on the new national clusters, and any questions or comments, suggestions, requests, just send us an email at support@computecanada.ca. If there's any questions. Okay, stop there.